Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar Powering Possibilities, Lessons Learned from Mini-Grid Application in Conflict and Fragile Context. My name is Ranisha Basnet, and today I'll be moderating this webinar along with my colleague Lisa Fellman from Energypedia. As you know, this webinar is jointly organized by ICRC, UNITA, and Energypedia and is part of an ongoing webinar series. So I do encourage you to check out all our previous webinars where we have touched upon different issues within the humanitarian energy nexus, such as powering WASH, powering humanitarian health operations, powering humanitarian facilities, and so on. So all you have to do is go on each of this link, click on it, and you'll land on a page where you have the recordings as well as a presentation from this webinars, from these previous webinars. And before we kickstart with the webinar, I just wanted to quickly give you some house rules. So on your screen, on the right side of your screen, you should have a control panel. On the control panel, there is a box that's called chat/questions. So please type in your questions, any problem you are facing, technical issues in the chat box, and my colleague will take care of it. And we will also collect all your questions during the webinar. And then towards the end, when we have our Q&A session, we will address them to each of the speakers. In case you don't see this box, so you might be able to see an orange icon. So when you're on the top of your screen, so if you click on that orange icon, or the control panel will expand. So please use the question box and send us your questions during the webinar. And also we will upload the webinar recording as well as the presentation to Energypedia. So you will have access to the webinar recording and the presentations after the webinar. So let's kickstart the webinar by knowing a little bit about you, the audience. So a poll question will pop up on your screen now. Sorry, we had some problems with the poll questions. I'm going to try sending it again. So please tell us, so you, the audience, please tell us in which sector do you work? So I see a lot of votes are coming in, so we will leave the poll question open for a few more seconds. And these poll questions are just to understand you, the audience, better so that we can tailor our webinar according to your interests and need. So I'm going to leave it for one more second, or let's say a few more seconds. So I'm now going to close it and display the result. So today we have a lot of people who are working in the humanitarian organization, followed by private sector, energy, research, and others. So thank you to all of you and welcome one more time. I have one more poll question popping up in your screen. So if you could let me know if you have ever implemented mini-grid in humanitarian settings. This could mean you have worked as a procurement officer, project officer, as a consultant, in any role that you were involved in mini-grids in humanitarian sector. So we do have our answers coming in, so we're going to leave it for a few more seconds. So I'm now going to close the poll and display the results. So we have a lot of people who have not worked, so I hope this webinar will be informative and useful to both who have worked in mini-grids and humanitarian setting before and those who have not. So back to our webinar, let's quickly run through the agenda for today. Today we have 4 presentations. The first presentation is from AC4All, and our colleague from AC4All will set the scene. Then we have 3 case studies from our colleague from UNDP Yemen, Nuru, and ICRC. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first presenter for today, Ingrid Rohrer. Ingrid is a clean cooking and energy associate at Sustainable Energy for All, and she has more than 4 years of experience in the rural electrification sector. And today, Ingrid is going to quickly give an overview on mini-grids in general. So Ingrid, the floor is yours. I'm going to quickly send you a request to share your screen. And in the meantime, please unmute your mic and you can proceed with the presentation.
Thank you, Ranisha. I hope everyone can see the screen with my presentation. Can you maybe, Ranisha, quickly confirm?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting us for today's webinar to set the scene for mini-grids in displacement setting. In my presentation, I will briefly present the mini-grids partnership and provide highlights from the recently launched State of the Global Mini-Grids Market Report, and finally, some considerations for adoption of mini-grids in displacement settings. So very briefly, the mini-grids partnership is a consortium of over 300 mini-grid stakeholders with a common goal of enhancing and complementing each other's work through greater collaboration and coordination in the sector. The current chair of the partnership is Amda, and SE4All serves as a co-secretariat. In July this year, the mini-grids partnership published its State of the Global Mini-Grids Market Report, which provides the latest updates on the global mini-grids market. The report highlights key industry trends, and also the goal of the report is to serve as a benchmark to measure progress for sector decision makers. The work was led by the mini-grids partnership that commissioned the report to Bloomberg Energy Finance. And I would also like to acknowledge the support we received from donors and partners on the data gathering as well as analysis of the report. Before jumping to highlights, what are mini-grids and why do we talk about them? Mini-grid can be defined as a set of electricity generators and also, if when applicable, energy storage systems interconnected to a distribution network that supplies electricity to a localized group of customers. The main feature of mini-grids is that they can operate isolated from the main grid, which enables them to be set up especially in remote locations. The value of mini-grids in developing countries is that they can offer faster access to electricity for many areas compared to grid extension, and they can act as a bridging technology until the main grid arrives. The benefits of renewable mini-grids is that they can also reduce energy costs compared to diesel generators and reduce environmental and climate impacts. Just briefly, in case of grid interconnected mini-grids, they can be used to bridge, for example, outages, and they can also provide additional ancillary services, for example, voltage control or frequency regulation. But I will not go into the detail. Focusing now on the highlights from our report, the analysis shows that over 100 million households can be served by mini-grids in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and island nations. This would come at a cost of approximately $128 billion of capital expenditure that is required for mini-grids. Another finding from the report is that solar mini-grids are being installed in continuously growing numbers, with the share of lithium-ion batteries increasing in the mix. As you can see on the slide, solar hybrid mini-grid systems have become increasingly competitive to other conventional and renewable technologies, and this is thanks to the continued price reductions of different solar and battery technologies. On the business models. The business models for mini-grids vary with different combinations and approaches according to who owns, finances, and operates the mini-grid assets. They vary according to technology, to customer types, to additional services that are being offered, and to tariff setting and billing. On the technology side, the AC solar hybrid mini-grids have become widely adopted, and also pre-engineered and standardized containerized systems become more available and used. When designing a mini-grid, developers also need to select which meters they want to use. And these can be conventional meters or smart meters. Smart meters offer prepayment solutions, and they also reduce the payment risk and actually eliminate the need to manually read the meter, which lowers the OPEX costs. And by using smart meters, it is possible to apply more complex tariff structures, and operators get important data on the actual operation of the system as well. In case if there is no meter, a simple load and energy limiters can be also used to cap the daily energy consumption. And this can be used, for example, as a low-cost and low-tech solution alternative. In the context of supplying electricity in displacement settings, some possible partnerships with the private sector can be explored, such as through leasing or power purchase agreements, to ensure delivery of the service and to facilitate financing. Regarding the CapEx breakdown, the cost of equipment represents the largest share of a CapEx. So a typical solar hybrid mini-grids include PV modules, AC/DC inverter, battery storage, backup diesel generator, and then on the distribution grid, the lines, poles, and smart meters. And of these generation assets, or of these components, the generation assets are the largest component of CapEx, which is being followed by the distribution assets. Another point that relates to reducing LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity, is adding productive uses, such as, for example, water pumping as customers or as a load to the mini-grid. And in the report, we saw that adding productive uses can lower the LCOE by 39 to 50%. So for the operators, it is very important to have productive use customers, because they can improve the daytime utilization of the power that is being produced by the solar mini-grid. Mini-grids in the humanitarian context, the humanitarian agencies often rely heavily on fossil fuels for electricity supply. Solar hybrid mini-grids can serve then as a solution to supply, for example, camps, refugee camps, with reliable and sustainable power, and they also can help reduce the diesel consumption and reduce CO2 emissions. When designing solar hybrid mini-grids, it is important to really understand the energy demand, so the oversizing or undersizing of the system can be avoided. And one way how to overcome this is, for example, by measuring the actual load that is supplied by the diesel generators over, let's say, a certain period of time. And then based on the measured data, it is possible to install like a modular system where the components can be scaled over time. Another important point is that also that, or consideration, is that diesel generators can be used as a backup for critical loads, and such as, for example, health centers or the offices, and also as a backup for times without the regular sunshine, so especially during the rainy season. On the O&M side, using smart meters, already mentioned, allow developers to monitor and optimize performance of mini-grids remotely, which can help reduce the OPEX costs. And the developers usually provide technical training to local staff who are then in charge of some O&M, of some basic O&M tasks. And regarding the funding, humanitarian interventions often rely on a funding which is based on annual budgets. And the upfront investment in this case can be lowered by, for example, hybridizing the existing diesel mini-grids with renewable sources. And also, as already mentioned, partnering with private sector and exploring new business models, such as, for example, leasing and PPA, can be a good solution tailored to match the nature of the funding. So this is it from me, and I give it back to you, Ranisha. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. I'll quickly switch back to my screen. Sorry, I'm having a quick problem switching back to my screen, so one quick second, please. Sorry for that short technical problem. And thank you, Ingrid, for setting the scene and the report that Ingrid talked about. We have also uploaded the report to the webinar documentation, please. So after the webinar, you can also go there and download the report. And moving forward, as I mentioned before, on the right side of your screen, you have a question box where you can type in all your questions. So please do tell us to whom the question is addressed to, for example, to Ingrid or speaker 1, speaker 2. So that will help us to pass on the question to the respective speaker. And then now moving forward, I would like to invite our second presenter for today, Arvind Kumar from UNDP Yemen. Arvind has worked for more than 16 years in the international humanitarian sector, and he has worked in countries in Asia, Middle East, and Africa. And today he's going to talk about a community-owned mini-grid project in Yemen. Arvind, the floor is yours, so you can unmute yourself and start the talk.
Thank you so much, Renisha. It's also a privilege for me to be part of this webinar, and I would like to extend all the wishes from UNDP Yemen country colleagues. The story that I would like to talk about is a microgrid station that has been set up in Yemen. And Yemen, as you know, that is a very conflict affected country. Where it has multiple issues and problems, and how we managed to implement this solar based intervention. I would like to narrate that story. Can we go to the next slide? Before going into the solar initiative, I would also like to give you the overall picture of Yemen, where we operate in, and how the environment looks like. I think when you look at the statistics, and I think they do tell you that it's not a very easy terrain to work in Yemen. And currently, with the arrival of COVID, Yemen is facing a double disaster in terms of like where you don't have where you have embargo. Where it is very difficult to do import of any medical or any other material unless there is a special waiver for that. So it's a very difficult country to work, and giving that understanding that there is a continuous the crisis has continuously unfolded from the first phase of the humanitarian to now has become a complete protracted crisis, and the frontline are still active. Can we go to the next slide? So as you see that it is a humanitarian crisis, but also now it has become a development crisis. And recently UNDP has done the study on assessing the impact of war, and it says that if this continues, the situation, the setback will increase to 4 decades actually. All the development gains that have been made. So it's a very difficult environment in Yemen. Both humanitarian and development crisis are now together unfolding, and all the operations that you see now is basically needs to cater both humanitarian and development needs of the people. Next slide, please. Now, going to the energy sector, I mean, before the crisis in Yemen, it was already a lowest access rate within the region. Yemen is also one of the poorest country within the Middle East, and majority of the services, public services or the businesses or the markets, highly dependent on fossil fuel. And if I can give you one example, that when the cholera outbreak happened, majority of the water system in Yemen simply couldn't function because of the lack of availability of the fossil fuel, which is a diesel. However, if you look at the other side of the energy, it has also risen up exponentially and contributing positively to the GDP. And this is the only sector after the construction in the context of the crisis contributing positively. However, the other side, which is the good news, is also that there has been a lot of solar energy penetration in Yemen, knowing that the power plants are not working, the energy infrastructures are not available, the prices of the diesel is skyrocketing, and people do not have a job actually to afford that. So the situation is very difficult. Next slide, please. And if you look at the bottleneck of energy sector in Yemen, recently we have done the value chain analysis. What we found that half of the demands have not been able to met, and the reason is, are many. One is the lack of supply, price, and poor quality. One of the key thing also what we have seen, though the energy sector has grown exponentially, but this is also very much centralized. So in the remote area, and if you look at the data, which suggests that 52% of the rural population in Yemen do not have access to any energy. There is no grid, and the grids are only available in the major cities, but in the rural areas are completely cut off. So they highly depend on the day-to-day their activities on fossil fuel, and which is quite expensive. Also, energy sector has been considered so far as a service delivery tool, distribution, installation, and operation maintenance, even from the humanitarian side. So this all actually are basically the bottlenecks of the energy sector in Yemen. Next slide, please. So what is the story that that we have implement we would like to talk, especially in this webinar, is about the solar microgrid model story. In the beginning, of course, this is supported by European Union, and we are implementing in Yemen in a very difficult locations where you have lack of access to the area. This is one of the hard to reach area where we are implementing, where you don't find the local markets very vibrant, and access to the market is also very difficult. So in the beginning, what we thought that instead of making it as a charity model or project supported model, why not to think about a business model? And that's why we just thought about we thought about to create that business model, so that even after the exit of the project, the model can continue. Next slide, please. At the same time, we also thought to have a community engagement approach in this business model, because as you know that in conflict context, the conflict sensitivity is such that it's very difficult to establish any such model where you have plenty of power holders and you need to negotiate, you need to work. So that's why you need to have the community engagement approach in order to kind of reach out to the power holders, where you need land, where you need the access to the market. And the best thing was that Yemen, after the crisis, there was a positive impact on the gender division of labor, where women are now being allowed to engage in economic activities, where most of the men are basically participating in political activities and in war. So that is where we also try to look at it, that how this can be community level. It will have a community acceptance through this model. And what we found is that group of women educated, they were managed to able to overcome some of the social and cultural barriers in order to promote this business model. Next slide, please. One of the things that I was talking about as a bottleneck is that if you look at the solar energy, it's quite centralized, and so as the services. So if you would like to have an operation maintenance, you need to get the service from the capital, which is very difficult. In some cases, they are not able to come because of the conflict context. They are expensive, all of it. So what we started thinking of that, why not to have a extension worker like agriculture, like livestock, and then you can have a solar energy extension workers, and that's why we are calling them a barefoot engineers. Obviously, there are technicians and the institutes who provided, with the support of ILO, we provided the operation maintenance training, that how you can still do the operation maintenance while having a basic training of the solar system. Next slide, please. And you can see that women can work on wiring. They can work on installing the solar panels, and they can also look after the batteries and all of it. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is what I was talking about, that this group of women are technically trained, and there is one person who is also a technician available at the doorstep whenever they need. They consult them and they pay them as well. Next slide, please. What we also looked at in this business model, that it has to be competitive, because the diesel sector is very structured, very powerful, but there was also an advantage to the to our side. One is that the diesel is available only for limited hour. That means electricity can run only for 2 hours to 3 hours maximum, and if you need to pay more. Whereas when we looked at the solar microgrid, it can run up to 10 hours, and the price was very competitive, like in 2 cents per hour by the solar microgrid, where you have to pay 40 cents per hour for diesel, and that's for limited time. So this is where the competitive model that we managed to develop, and even in the time of COVID, this model is continue to operate. One of the reason is that that even the diesel price globally has come down, but due to the conflict context in Yemen, the prices of the diesel has continued to rise. So the market fluctuation is there, but because the longevity of the access to the clean energy, I think that's where people have got influenced, and they are able to get this very affordable and clean energy. Next slide. And overall, when you look at it, there is also socioeconomic response to this crisis. You see that women coming out, group of women coming out and making this as a business. Initially, the solar energy sector was seen as a service delivery model, that you get the private sector, they come install solar, and then operation and maintenance. But now this has also become an income generation. And why I'm saying it's socioeconomic response, because when you look at in the humanitarian sector, the cash assistance, especially in Yemen, the cash assistance is 30%, which I'm giving you the data on from 2019, which was $4 billion, the humanitarian response plan, and 30% was cash assistance. But despite that huge injection of cash, the status of the beneficiaries have not moved, or they have not graduated. What I mean about that, coping up their vulnerabilities and moving on. One of the key reason is that they continue to become more vulnerable, because the cash assistance does not provide them a sustainable income generation opportunities, which the solar is. Second, why group of women are finding this very exciting opportunity, because it is very decent and dignified job, where you will find that in cash for work, in humanitarian setting, it's very hard to get engaged to the women, because of the design of the civil work. The design of the cash for work approach does not favor them much more what they would like to do and they wish to do. So this is the kind of response what we see. Energy as an entry point into the humanitarian crisis, but they can also build on and bring the development aspects, so that we can build the humanitarian and development nexus actually. Next slide, please. So you see that, I mean, this is the kind of we have now 3 stations. Basically, we installed it. All of them are making profit. They are more than now almost 18 months, more than that. You can see that on the extreme left side, there are meters. So the billing, the tariff system has been developed. It's a prepaid model that for first 10 days you have to pay for that. And in other areas, we have also the consumption model that so these are the 2 different models. And you can see their revenue. They keep making revenue. So one of this group is generating around $500 to $600 per month, and that's basically giving into their hands on a monthly basis, like $80 or $90 per month, where the cash assistance is going to give you $100 or $120 for 4 rounds only. So this kind of approach is not saying that cash assistance is not required, but what we are doing is that we are building on that cash assistance and making sure that the beneficiaries graduate from their original status. Next slide, please. And this is what we thought to promote the decentralized solar solutions to improve access to affordable energy. Why we say so? That in Yemen, as I said in the beginning, the infrastructure of energy sector is not very much there. They are far more disconnect to the rural community, and even if there is a new investment coming in Yemen, it will take ages to make everybody access through on-grid system. And therefore these local solutions will definitely thrive, and we are even planning from 3 to 100 microgrids, and diversifying this not only just to suit the residential and commercial, but also going to the public services where hospitals and schools do not have the same issues of lack of access to energy. Many of the hospitals during the time of cholera were not being treated just because that they did not have access to the electricity. So this is where we are looking that side. Plus we are also trying to look at waste, water, and how we can bring the work dimension into this decentralized solution to make it more attractive. Because these all three micro stations are now functional and making profit, there is also interest now from the private sector to invest into expanding this, and so as with the microfinance institutions, because initially the banks, the microfinance institutions were not very keen to provide loan just because that the enterprises were not making money and there was no cash in the banks. But now, because of that profit making opportunity, MFIs and private sectors are coming forward. Next slide. Happy to share that this initiative was recently awarded by ASDEN under Humanitarian Energy category. I have also put some reference material in case if you would like to read through them, just for your information. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Arvind, for that amazing insight into your project. And now moving forward, I would like to invite our third presenter for today, Kyle Hamilton. Kyle is the Senior Manager of Strategy and Partnership at NURU, where he has been working for the past 3 years. And today, Kyle is going to share about a commercial mini-grid project of 1.3 megawatt that is implemented by NURU. Kyle, the floor is yours. So I'm going to send you a request to share your screen.
Excellent. Thank you, Renisha, and thank you, Energypedia and Unitar, for having me today for today's presentation. I'm excited to be here with you and to tell you a bit more about NURU and our new project here, this 1.3 megawatt site in Goma. So a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll be first sharing a little about NURU's vision, history, business model, and then I'll give a little context about Congo and the neighborhood we're working in Goma, which is the provincial capital of North Kivu province. And I'll talk about a little bit about how we're addressing that particular context through our 1.3 megawatt solar-based mini grid, the impact that it's having, some of the challenges and lessons we've learned, and where we're going in the future. Okay, so NURU is, our vision is basically to provide 5 million delighted customers in Congo with world-class connectivity by 2024. NURU finances, builds, and operates off-grid, utility-scale, solar hybrid mini-grids with integrated smart meter technology and mobile money payment systems. And during the next 2 years, we plan to deploy and operate at least 39 megawatts of solar-based mini-grids, serving tens of thousands of people in Eastern Congo. Our achievements to date. So NURU first started out with the name Kivu Green Energy. We started in Beni, and our first project was to help deploy a 35 kilowatt pilot project at a university in Beni, North Kivu. And then we built on that experience to deploy the first commercial solar hybrid mini grid in Congo with this 55 kilowatt solar based mini grid in Beni and serving one neighborhood in particular. And then building on that experience, we were able to close Series A financing from our investors, Electrify and Energy Access Ventures, to build this 1.3 megawatt peak solar hybrid mini grid in Goma, which we commissioned in February 2020. and we're currently serving about 600 customers, and we continue to add customers weekly. And we're looking to ultimately serve up to 2,000 households, businesses, and social institutions in Goma. And looking forward to the future here, we plan to serve a project pipeline of about 39 megawatts during the next few years, next 2 years by 2022, and hopefully by 2024, potentially up to 60 to 100 megawatts. Our target market and business model drives everything that we do. And so, like I said, we serve households, businesses, social institutions. We try to provide at least 60% of our energy towards households, small and medium enterprises, smaller organizations, and then 40% of our energy goes to large businesses, which serve as our anchoring clients. Basically, we sign power purchase agreements with these large businesses or letters of intent with them in order to make the project bankable, so we can take it to investors and demonstrate, hey, we have a strong interest here in this area, and we can make the project scalable, sustainable, and commercial. So as such, we often target and focus on urban zones, primarily powered by diesel gensets, so we can displace that reliance on diesel gensets, which are often very expensive, both to maintain. They often have to be replaced regularly, and they're of course a dirty, unclean source of energy. So we often are focusing in these urban zones where there is a lot of commercial activity and a lot of productive use and high energy demand, proximate to densely populated areas, often with kind of a mix of some people that have energy access, but often who do not or are underserved and have unmet demand. And so really, again, kind of really focused on developing relationships with businesses to sign power purchase agreements and letters of intention to kind of set the stage to kind of be able to serve a wider population in those areas. We have a lot of partners that we are so grateful for, investors, donors, and here are some of them. I'll be talking about some of them a little bit further on, but just so grateful for these folks who support and make our work on the ground possible. A little bit about Congo's context. So Congo, it's a large country with a significant population there, but with many challenges as well. As you can see, there are over 100 armed groups operating in Congo, and millions of internally displaced persons and refugees, and millions in need of humanitarian assistance. So it's a very challenging business context, and as such, only 19% of the population has access to energy currently. And usually those that have access to energy usually rely on diesel gensets or wood or charcoal and kerosene, and diesel and wood and charcoal in particular are significant environmental stressors. And even those that do have access to energy often do not have sufficient or adequate or convenient or sustainable access to energy, even at a very low level. And so really energy poverty in Congo is really one consequence and symptom of Congo's complex context of fragility and insecurity. Despite these challenges, there is, according to the World Bank, a huge unmet demand and underserved demand in DRC. There's supposedly 5,000 gigawatt hours of unmet and underserved demand as of 2018, and that's expected to grow precipitously during the next few years. And the annual solar-based market is supposed to be around $921 million or more annually. So it's a huge business opportunity. It's a huge social need, and the potential for solar to step in and step up and meet these needs is huge. The mini grid market in Congo is very exciting, and it's very favorable because in 2014, the government privatized the sector, and enables private companies like Nuru to come in and propose cost-reflective tariffs so that we can make the work that we're doing sustainable and provide world-class electricity to people on the ground. It enables us to bring a return on investment and make it an exciting place for people to want to come in and support the work that we're doing on the ground. And so it's really an environment that is very conducive for solar-based mini grids, and yet there are still many things coming together. We're still learning how to work as we work with the government, how to do this well together. And so it's an exciting opportunity, a place where we can really try new things and work together to really provide the electricity that people need. And one of the other things too is we were able to get concessions at a provincial level. And so we can get these concessions that last up to 30 years to provide electricity in these various areas where we have concessions. And I'll be showing you a few of those areas shortly. Okay, now to Goma, North Kivu, which is where this 1.3 megawatt site is located, just a little bit for you to understand about the context. So Goma is located in North Kivu province on Lake Kivu at the DRC-Rwanda border. Goma was really transformed by a series of conflicts, in particular 1994 genocide and on, because that brought in a huge group of humanitarian and NGOs to address the situation, and UN peacekeeping operation MONUSCO. And Goma really grew then from a city of 300,000 to 1 to 2 million. So, and it has a current annual growth rate of about 10%. And it's now become, because of all these NGOs and people coming in to address the humanitarian development context in Congo, in Eastern Congo, it's become a place where a lot of people have sought refuge from conflicts in rural areas, but also because of the opportunities that are now there. And as a result, there has been some development and focus on energy in Goma, and yet it's highly inequitable, which I'll show in a moment. So 46% of Goma has some kind of limited energy access. And I should say limited, but the 46% just means, people have some energy access, but it's often very insufficient. As you can see, 86% of Goma's businesses strongly agree that they lack reliable energy, and that prevents them from being able to grow and develop their business properly. So it's still a serious issue. And as you can see here, while 46% have some energy access, most people do not have it, and even those that do have it don't have adequate energy access. And it's also very unevenly distributed throughout the city. As you can see in the Northwest, which is the areas where Nuru is working, there's 3%, 1%, 5% energy access rates. And yet, energy access, urban infrastructure is absolutely key for addressing Goma's ongoing insecurity, which is, despite being a hub for NGOs and humanitarian actors, it continues to have a lot of challenges with insecurity, especially in the neighborhoods where Nuru is working. And so 73% of Goma's residents really say, in order for things to get better in terms of security, we need things like lighting, public lighting, exterior lighting. And as you can see from this report from Rift Valley Institute, they say that quote, several dimensions of urban insecurity in Goma are similar to dynamics in other Congolese cities. But the big need here is to get access to urban infrastructure, and there needs to be greater investment in urban infrastructure, especially public lighting. And we'll show you how we're addressing that in a moment. Indosho neighborhood, this is the neighborhood that we're operating in. It's a neighborhood with 80,000 plus people, 12,000 plus households, very ethnically diverse, a lot of formerly internally displaced persons and refugees with 3% energy access rates, very poor, a lack of access to basic human services and needs, and 41% of Ndosho's residents report experiencing robbery during the past year. So there's chronic high crime and insecurity. 90% of Ndosho's inhabitants do not feel safe walking alone at night. So this is our response. It's this 1.3 megawatt mini grid, and it's been operational, like I said, since February 2020, and it's comprised of solar PV modules. We have Tesla power packs to provide battery storage, and we have a diesel genset to ensure reliability of the system. And we, as I mentioned, our objective is to provide electricity to about 40% of our electricity to commercial industrial enterprises or large organizations, and then 60% to residential and small and medium enterprises. And our target is to provide electricity to up to 2,000 customers. This is kind of the basic structure of of our system. And so we have the controller, the containerized controller area that monitors our systems and controls everything. We have the photovoltaic modules, we have the battery storage and the diesel genset, and we provide electricity to these clients. And here's some pictures of our site. In terms of how we got from A to B, or A to Z, I should say, it was definitely our first time growing from a 55 kilowatt to a 1.3 megawatt site was a huge undertaking and scaling, and so we learned a lot through this process. And the basic overview, though, of kind of how we got there is we conducted feasibility studies to understand the market need, the demand, to understand the social context, to figure out what's the environmental, social dimensions that we're going to be needing to address. We went through a regulatory approval process, working largely with the provincial government, but also with the national government as part of that process, and trying to engage the widest range of government offices as possible. NURU has really tries to dedicate a lot of resources and time and effort towards government relations, because that's absolutely key. And then we've worked with commercial, larger organizations and larger businesses to sign power purchase agreements, as you can see, and then we work on the design phase and deployment and the financing. A number of these things are simultaneous, as you can see. And then we were pretty excited when we commissioned in February 2020. The basic customer journey is, again, just really trying to understand our customer, what they need, what are their pain points, what would convenient, affordable energy look like for them, what is their willingness to pay, what's their ability to pay, their energy consumption needs, their ability to use mobile money, since we use mobile money payment systems. How can we understand our customer to help them use our services and achieve their goals through energy access? And one of the key things that we end up doing with them is we sign user agreements with our customers. They pay for a connection fee. We set up a smart meter. We connect their households. We provide energy, and we assess their customer delight. So NURU is all about ensuring the delight of its customers. This is just an example of one of the large businesses that we're providing electricity to. We started providing in June electricity to 3 telecom towers in Goma. And so we're currently providing electricity to these with 100% uptime. And we're very excited to be working with this power provider, which serves various telecom companies. One of our other key partners that I want to highlight is Energy Peace Partners. So Energy Peace Partners has developed this Peace Renewable Energy Credit, and NURU has become the first certified company to sell these Peace Renewable Energy credits. And PRECs, for short, PRECs basically are a renewable energy certificate with peace building co-benefits or social co-benefits. And so one of the key ways that we partnered with Energy Peace Partners was to sell these renewable energy credits to a large Fortune 100 company, who then provided us with the funding to build streetlights, which you can see here. And this is one of the signature impact that we have through this project. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But through this project, we're providing over 600 clients with energy access right now. Nuru is currently employing 60 people, so we're providing jobs both at our plant at Nuru, but also in the community. We have these 35 streetlights, and these streetlights are playing a huge role because the neighborhood currently where we're based in, as I've said, people don't feel safe walking alone at night. They don't feel safe in general. There's a lot of robbery. And so having these streetlights has been significant for enhancing neighborhood security and road safety. It gives people more hours to work and to run errands later in the evening as well. Because we've been committed to providing electricity to existing businesses in these communities as well, it's also reduced CO2 emissions because it's displaced their dependence on diesel gensets. And then we've seen a lot of small and medium enterprises develop or invest in their business further because now they have access to reliable electricity supply. And households, for example, one of the ways they're benefiting is by having access to light at night, which enables them to study and so on. Some of the challenges that we're facing and some of the lessons that we've been learning this year, there's really in Congo a nascent regulatory environment, so there's a lot of different opportunities for engaging the government, to working with them to try to improve the regulatory environment, to streamline processes. And that's been a challenge and an opportunity for us to engage in. And one of the lessons for us has been really to invest in those relationships with government and community members. And then there's burgeoning energy sector capacity. So we've had to develop a lot of capacity in-house and learning as we go because there isn't there hasn't been a lot of human resource development in energy sector. So that's been something we've been having to develop ourselves. COVID-19, like I said, we launched in February 2020, and then COVID hit. Rwanda shut its borders with Congo, and that just put a lot of pressure on the business and the communities in Goma. So those are just some of the challenges that we faced, and how we've navigated that is by putting a lot of resources into improving our processes for managing project timelines, developing relationships with different people in the community, whether government or NGOs or civil society. That has been absolutely key for us. And so, as you can see, I think the streetlights in particular have been a way of demonstrating we're here for the community, we care about the community, and I think the streetlights have been a great example of something where it's business forward social impact, where it's providing a service to people in the community that want streetlights, and it's also developing and building social capital in these communities for us. And just one quick look forward real quick. We recently won a grant, Hope in Conflict Humanitarian Grand Challenge, which is hosted and organized by USAID, the UK government, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, with support from Grand Challenges Canada. And we're going to be using this grant to expand the work that we've started in Ndosho and move into a few other neighborhoods adjacent to Goma, to Ndosho, where there's a lot of need for energy, but also very similar insecurity dynamics and low income and lack of access to basic human services. So that's a little bit about what we're doing, and I look forward to hearing your questions later on. Thank you so much. Over back to you, Renisha.
Thank you, Kyle. Then I'll quickly switch back to my screen. And without further ado, I would like to invite our last presenter for today, Emma Hullebeck. Emma works with the International Committee of the Red Cross as the Resilience Program Advisor in Gaza. And today she's going to talk about a feasibility study that that ICRC conducted on community microgrid in the Gaza Strip. Emma, the floor is yours. I'm going to send you a request to share your screen.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. I will just, can you confirm that you're seeing my presentation?
Yes, I can see it. Please go ahead with the presentation.
Perfect, okay. 1 second. Okay, so it is a pleasure to be part of this panel today and hearing fascinating work of Ingrid, Arvind, and Kyle. So today I'll be sharing with you some of our work towards developing a community microgrid in the Gaza Strip. This is the first community microgrid ICRC is implementing. So we're first piloting it here in Gaza with hopes of then developing similar projects in other contexts. At this point, we're still quite early in the stage of the project. We're just wrapping up our in-house feasibility study. So I'll be focusing more on the journey that we have taken to get to this stage. So first, considering the unique complexities of Gaza's context, it's interesting to briefly understand some of the challenges resulting from the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. Firstly, there's the blockade that has been in place since 2007, and this is largely restricting movement of Gazans in and out, restricting trade and the ability of Gaza to connect with the international market, and also restricting the entry of any material that is considered dual use. Dual use items can be what's considered usable for military aims. But this is quite broadly interpreted and often includes items such as cement and pipes, which are vital for repairs and reconstruction of infrastructure. It's been estimated by the World Bank that this blockade has caused about a 50% drop in Gaza's GDP since 2007. Secondly, there's the issue of destruction. So over 3 years, there was 3 wars in Gaza over 6 years in 2008, 2012, and 2014. Now, these wars not only caused a high number of deaths and injuries, but also caused severe damage to some critical infrastructure, including water and wastewater networks, the Gaza power plant, which is still only operating at 66% of its original capacity due to the damages. Thirdly, there's the issue of population growth. So Gaza has a fertility rate of about 4.5 children per woman, which results in an annual growth rate of 3.4%. Therefore, the population is going to go from 2 million today to about 4 million in 2040, which essentially doubles the demands in 20 years. There is also a high unemployment rate in Gaza related to the economic situation I described, which means about 50% of Gaza is facing unemployment. And those that are employed, about 80% earn below the statutory minimum wage. This means that things like electricity bills become quite unaffordable for households to consider. Specifically in the electricity sector, Gaza faces additional challenges. There's approximately a 55% deficit of electricity supply to Gaza, with only 45% of the demands being met. Gaza receives electricity from 3 main sources. Firstly, these 10 Israeli lines shown in blue, that's up to 120 megawatts. Egyptian lines in the bottom in gray, there's 3 lines, but they have not been operating since 2018. And in red is the Gaza power plant, which produces between 20 to 80 megawatts, depending on fuel availability. And you have to note that the fuel is often coming from external sources. So in this case, all 3 sources are very highly dependent on the outside world, which makes them quite vulnerable to and subjected to political interference. Also, we have a fairly inefficient electricity grid in Gaza. There's a few issues. So first of all, due to the supply deficit, the electricity utility has to rotate the electricity to different sections of the grid. And since the switches are mostly manually operated, this means that teams of technicians have to go around Gaza each day to switch on and off sections of the grid. There's also a lack of connections between supply lines. So a lot of the supply lines have a radial layout, and this limits the ability to redirect electricity to meet the changing needs or in case a supply line is damaged. There's also very little in the way of demand data due to the lack of modern technology in the grid, which limits the ability for the utility to have an accurate understanding of the demands of the various sectors and limits their ability to optimize the supply. There's approximately 30% losses in the network, both technical and non-technical, and these are resulting technical losses from poor electrical components and cables, and non-technical losses from electricity theft. And finally, there's also quite low revenue collection rates, between 50–60%. And again, this is related to the poor economic situation in Gaza. So let's look at how some of the consequences, how the consequences are affecting life in Gaza. Well, there's about rotating schedules of 6 to 12 hours per day. This has impacts on many of the sectors, including the water and wastewater treatment and pumping, the provision of healthcare services, local businesses, households, and public facilities. So as a coping mechanism, many of those that can afford it have installed backup generators and now increasingly also solar panels. However, running generators also brings a new set of problems to the equation, because now we have an issue with air and noise pollution in Gaza, as well as the expense of being able to access fuel and then also get spare parts in Gaza, where it's difficult to access these things. It's estimated that there are approximately 100,000 generators in Gaza, and they can consume up to 500,000 liters of fuel per day. So one of our main aims in Gaza in the ICRC is to strengthen the resilience of essential services and communities. So resilience is the ability of a system to absorb, adapt, and recover from a shock or a stress. In Gaza, a shock can be an escalation in the hostilities, while stresses can include population growth and then the subsequent demands from that. Although almost all sectors are reliant on electricity to operate, so we've identified electricity shortages as one of the major constraints reducing the resilience of almost all sectors and impacting almost all facets of life in Gaza. Having developed a better understanding of some of the challenges and complexities with the electricity system, we wanted to know, how is the population coping with the electricity gap left by the public supply? So to answer this, we went around Gaza and documented all the various electricity coping mechanisms we could find. We also asked who are managing these systems, and what are the coping mechanisms when it comes to generation and distribution of energy, control techniques, management setups, and how can we develop and scale up well-functioning initiatives? So we were able to identify and categorize 23 different types of coping mechanisms and build an understanding of how the formal and the informal energy market was being managed. So while these coping mechanisms are still far from bridging the gap left by the public power provision, they're at least providing us with a framework for ideas to be pulled together and partnerships that can be created that can help us to provide a more holistic solution to the energy gap. So it was from this thinking that we were able to start thinking about the idea of a community microgrid. Again, our main aim is to strengthen resilience. So in light of this, a microgrid would improve the redundancy, flexibility, and reliability of the electricity supply for a community, thereby increasing its resilience to disruptions. The idea was to ensure that all functional aspects of the community could be connected together in a microgrid so that the community as a whole could remain functional during periods of electrical disruption. The microgrid is essentially a combination of decentralized energy sources, such as solar, diesel generators, and batteries, and smart grid components like smart meters, auto reclosers, and SCADA. In our case, we want the microgrid to be able to function both on and off grid, and these are usually referred to as grid interactive or hybrid microgrids. So when the utility is on, it is powering the microgrid, and the surplus solar electricity is able to feed into the network based on a net metering agreement with the utility. When the utility is off, the community microgrid is isolated from the network, and the microgrid is powered by the decentralized energy sources. So in theory, this is what we were trying to achieve in this project. To start the process, we needed to identify a case study option for the feasibility study. So we defined a set of criteria and sub-criteria and to use in a multi-criteria decision analysis. So we considered things like the feasibility study, financial feasibility, looking at installation costs, looking at what energy sources were existing in terms of solar space availability, existing capacity of generators, what are the water sources available, how is the location in terms of vulnerability during hostilities, what community services were available, and how was the management of the community that was existing and their relationship with the authorities. So from the 6 options that we had, we were able to select the best option to proceed. So this is our community that was selected. It consists of residential towers with local businesses at the bottom of each tower. We have 2 water wells, 3 UN schools plus 1 governmental school, and one of the UN schools is also a shelter during hostilities. We have a health clinic run by the Ministry of Health, a kindergarten, and a mosque run by the Ministry of Religion. We've also identified additional residential towers in the case that we want to scale up the microgrid in the future. So to start the feasibility study, we first wanted to go to the community and gather more information from the community itself. So this included assessing the solar space available, considering that solar panels are basically the most feasible decentralized energy source in Gaza. The feasibility study itself consists of 4 sections. There's the stakeholder analysis, the technical analysis, the financial analysis, and looking at ownership and management options. I don't have time to go into the details of each, but we'll just do a high-level overview. So for the stakeholder analysis, we completed a questionnaire with representatives of each stakeholder group to determine what is their current situation, their baseline, and how will the project potentially impact each group of stakeholders. From these questionnaires, and also partly from our existing knowledge and awareness of our local staff here, we were able to develop and map out the interest versus influence of each stakeholder group. This provided insight to how we might want to engage with the different stakeholders as we continue in the process. So you can see in each quadrant, we have the different strategies of monitoring, keep satisfied, keep informed, engage closely, and influence actively. In the technical analysis, we have considered various demand scenarios, for example, covering the full demands of the community, covering the essential demands, or just the critical demands. We estimated or measured the demands of each stakeholder group to develop a 24-hour demand profile from which we've designed the various options for the electricity supply. So you can see here the options of the different size of solar array we could install depending on which demands we choose to cover. There are 2 modes of operation that we're considering. Normal is when the grid is on, and emergency, which is when the grid is off for prolonged periods. So for example, here we'll focus on the scenario 1, which is full demands in normal operations, which is when the grid is on. So in this case, we have 51% of the supply coming from the solar PV and 49% coming from the utility. During emergency operations, i.e. if the grid is off, we're considering 2 options. Firstly, with no batteries, and secondly, with batteries. So it's worth noting that batteries, firstly, are quite expensive, and secondly, are often considered a dual-use item in Gaza, so it might be quite difficult to bring them in. So when there are no batteries, the generators must run even during the solar hours to be able to energize the lines. If the generators are running, then they have to run at a minimum of 30% of their capacity in order not to cause damage to the generator itself. In this case, any surplus solar electricity will be lost since there is no energy storage mechanism. So you can see this is not the most efficient setup. If there are batteries in the system, then they can be used to energize the power lines during the solar hours, which allows the generators to be completely turned off in those hours. In this case, the surplus solar electricity is not enough to charge the batteries, so either the solar system will have to be expanded, or the batteries can be charged by the generators during the generator running hours. In this case, we have 53% of the supply from the PV and 47% from the generator. In the financial analysis, we considered the capital costs of the system. This is what will be funded by the ICRC. And this includes the consultant fees for the detailed design, the materials purchase, and the installation contract. And obviously it'll vary very much depending on which size of system we choose to implement, and this is still under our consideration. We also determined operating costs, considering a 30-year lifespan analysis, and this takes into account the replacement costs of components at the end of their lifespan. So for example, the smart meters will need to be replaced in 15 years, so the cost of their replacement should be accounted for in these annualized costs. The operation and maintenance costs and asset leases were also included. These asset leases consider the value of certain existing assets owned by the community, including existing generators and PV, but also looking at the existing roof space that could be used for the solar panels. So this provides an incentive for the community to contribute their assets into the system. Based on these operating costs, the optimized tariff rates were determined for each electricity source, And the design options with the lowest tariffs were the most optimized. Of course, in this case, the utility tariff is set by the utility company. We also considered various different ownership and management options and combinations. So for example, this is a community-owned, utility-managed setup, which is not what we're deciding on, but it's one of the options that we're looking into. So in this case, the owners would have a net metering, the community would have a net metering agreement with the electricity utility company, and they would also have a contract for the operation and maintenance. The operation and maintenance responsibilities would be delegated to the local utility branch, and they would carry out these services, integrating their SCADA system with the smart meter components, smart device components in the microgrid. So this means there'll be a back and flow of information. There will be one single financial transaction which considers the electricity tariffs for each source, the operation and maintenance fees from the contract, and minus the lease payments for the community. So while there's only actually one transaction, it effectively will provide monthly savings to the community because of the lease payments and because of the lower tariffs. And this savings will then eventually be used by the community for replacement costs or future expansion. Similarly, we mapped out the relationships and exchanges of some of the other ownership and management scenarios to develop our understanding of the various options. Based on these analyses, we're currently wrapping up the feasibility study and will soon proceed to the next steps. Firstly, we'll be presenting some of these options to the various stakeholders involved, and we'll need their buy-in in order for the project to remain viable. Next, we'll be doing a detailed design. We'll have a consultant to complete this, and then moving on to the procurement and installation, and finally the monitoring and evaluation, where we see the project impacts and learn from the process. So this brings an end to my presentation today. Thank you very much, and looking forward to any questions.
Thank you, Emma. Then I'll quickly switch back to my screen. And thank you to all of our presenters for all of your amazing presentations. And now it's time to go into our Q&A round. If you have not sent in your questions, please use the chat box on the right side of your screen and just type in your questions. And do let us know to whom the question is addressed to, and then we can pass it to the respective speaker. So maybe we can start with you, Arvind. We have a question coming in. So the question is about the community-owned model that you presented. So from your experience, what are the challenges in these kind of models? For example, the community sensitization, does it take a long time? If you could quickly highlight the challenges of such a model, that would be great.
I think one of the biggest challenge was the acceptance of such kind of a model, because it wasn't seen there. It is a first private community-owned station, and the obvious challenge was, as I said in the presentation, was the diesel operators, which are very structured. So they were a certain influence to the community leaders to establish such stations. So that's one. The second is obviously none of the women that you saw in the presentation were trained to do the solar, because solar energy has been considered as a very sophisticated system where people think that it's only that few trained people only can handle that. So so there were also myths around that, that we try to address by providing orientation, giving them in-house training and all of it. But third, the most important challenge is that whether this will run, because that in Yemen there is a very there is a lack of the institutions. They are not there to enforce and regulate. Secondly, the market itself, whether it's the private sector will support this initiative or not. So even if this grow with the support of the project, how they will remain viable, in future, if they want to scale up, from where the money comes, whether they will make a profit. So all this came into the designing process, and I think we will still say that we are still growing, and I think we need to look at the viable option by connecting with the finance institutions as well as with the private sector. Over.
Thank you so much. I think I also have one follow-up question to the many challenges that you mentioned. because you involved a lot of women in your project, did you face a lot of resistance in the beginning from their families or the communities when you were trying to involve these women? And if yes, what kind of step did you take to get the women on board, community sensitization or involving the other members of family, so on?
Yeah, you see this in displacement setting, you have the displaced population as well as host. That's number one. I think that itself is a challenge, how you create that cohesion within the when you do the intervention. The second one is that, as I said, in Yemen, women were not allowed to do the economic activities before the crisis. But the crisis actually also is now seen as a blessing in disguise, where the gender division of labor has been broken, where women can now do the economic activities. Of course, that also exposes them into a lot of other protection related risks. But however, the initial challenge was how to convince them, because they didn't want to do this kind of a business. But then, and slowly, with the consultation, we do have our community engagement approach, which helped us actually. And one of the things that the cultural acceptance is that as a group of women, and the group women, if they want to do a business, I think for them the social hurdle becomes much easier. To overcome social hurdle it is much easier, because you will find, because of the context, in Yemen, that there is hardly you find any opposition coming and stopping them to work. So I think even with the local authorities, I think they got support with such a unique initiative which they have taken.
Thank you so much, Arvind. Then I would like to move to Kyle, because we have a lot of questions coming in about the tariff of Nuru that Nuru has implemented. So the first question is, how did you calculate the tariff in this project in Goma?
Yeah, so it's a cost reflective tariff. So it's based on the CapEx and OpEx costs, and it's something that we negotiate with the regulator in Congo. And so it's a dynamic tariff that is based on whether we're using, so we have our sites typically have about a 72% renewable energy factor. And so when we're using solar, it's cheaper, and when we're using diesel, it's more expensive. And so we have that dynamic tariff.
So, and I have a question to that. So in your case, you have a mobile payment. So when you decided to implement, for example, your project in this region, was the mobile payment already there, or it was a new technology that you guys brought in and communicated to the general public?
Yeah, that's a great question. So mobile money is still burgeoning in Congo. Unlike some of the neighboring countries in East Africa, it's not widely adopted and used technology, but we are using mobile money that the telecoms are providing. And so it's not a new technology that we're providing. It's the whole system together and how the components fit together that is innovative for the context and the business model that we're operating with.
Thank you. And one last question to the same tariff part. It's about for the consumer. So how do they pay? Is it pay as you consume, or is it a fixed tariff that they pay every month?
Yeah, so for large businesses and organizations, it's post-paid, and then for smaller consumers, households, smaller organizations, SMEs, it's prepaid using mobile money. And basically, I think one of the key issues there is that people want to be able to pay pay as they go, but I think one of the things that we've found is that people are very familiar with paying for bundles of phone credit, and so we've kind of modeled our electricity kind of similar to what people are used to doing in terms of paying bundles for phone credit. We've kind of come up with something similar where people pay in bundles.
Super, thank you so much. Now maybe moving to Emma, the question to you is, can you shed light on the time frame of the project? That is expected time to complete the feasibility study, then time to design the system, and so on.
Very good question, and difficult to answer during the current situation with COVID. Gaza was a little bit behind in having the COVID outbreak, but as of about 3 weeks ago, we've now been shut down mostly in lockdown phase. So this is causing some delays now. The other unknown is also when we're coordinating for items to enter Gaza. So especially some of these components, these electrical components, like smart meters, the data concentrators, the artery closers, these can sometimes take quite a long time to go through the coordination process to receive approval to bring into Gaza. And we have to kind of show what they're being used for and go through this process. And that sometimes can take several months. So we're hoping the feasibility study will be completed in these next weeks, to be honest. It's basically finished. And then we will be looking to do this stakeholder consultation and detailed design in the next 6 months, I would say.
Thank you so much. Then I move to Ingrid. Ingrid, the question to you is, what kind of selection criteria can one use for sizing batteries? So if you had some selection criteria in your head that you can just quickly say, that would be great. Ingrid, you are muted. Ingrid, are you there? I think we're having some problem getting Ingrid on the line, so maybe we proceed with a question that is addressed to all the speakers. And the question is, how can we address community/government problems while developing the solar PV project in least developed countries? So maybe you guys, everyone can share their experiences, and maybe we can start with you, Arvind, followed by Kyle and Emma.
So Ranisha, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, the question is, how can we address all the different kinds of community and government problems with regulations and so on, especially when you are developing solar PV projects in least developed countries or in, let's say, conflict situations?
I think, especially in the case of Yemen, when you work in a displaced setting as well, it's very difficult to reach out to the government, and because they are also now, giving a positive feedback that they are willing to kind of cooperate to see these initiatives. So I think the community challenges are many actually. When you look at, there are humanitarian challenges, there are crisis related challenges, and to coordinate with the government for us is the local authority that we work with them, where you have a Department of Renewable Energy in connection. But still, I would say that it's a task that probably one needs to really start from the beginning of the initiation of these kind of initiative, because it's very difficult to kind of coordinate and then convince, because ultimately this becomes a private entity and MSMEs. And MSMEs have its own challenges and scope, where you are not allowed to register. If you are registered, then you have to have a taxation and others. So the legal side of it in the conflict context is yet to settle and revised, especially when it comes to the community microgrid model. So what we are talking about is that how do we reach out to the government and the private sector and come up with some kind of support to the communities that these are being registered, under the framework of the government processes.
Thank you so much. Then maybe Kyle, I can move to you, and you can say from your own experience, how would you approach, or what is the best way to address community or government regulation problems and so on when you are implementing such projects?
Yeah, thank you, Ranisha. Great question, and I touched on this a little bit during the presentation, but I think we've really tried to invest in community and government relations from the get-go, before we even do construction work for the project in the site. And so for us, it's investing in these relationships at the local, the neighborhood, the city, the provincial, the national level, whether it's government or civil society. And it's really learning to understand what their interests are, what their goals are, and how can we speak to those goals and interests in a way that demonstrates that that our projects are really going to be there to benefit the community, but also that it aligns with their interests. So, for example, the government, if we can collaborate and coordinate and work together to provide energy access to people that don't have it, or to provide better energy access and cleaner energy access to those that do have a little bit already. I think that demonstrates that the government is being proactive. They look good. We also are generating revenue and paying taxes and hiring people and creating jobs. We're helping other businesses grow and develop their businesses more by having more stable, reliable energy. And so I think it's really helping to think about, okay, who's our audience? Who are the different stakeholders that we need to engage here, and how can we align our interests and goals and frame things accordingly?
Thank you so much. Emma, would you like to add something to that from your own experience?
Sure, yeah. I think what I'm going to say is just going to complement the other answers as well. We're very much working with the authorities and the relevant stakeholders from the very beginning of the project. And a big part of what we are wanting to do is build the capacity of the service providers and make sure that they're involved from the very beginning. So, I mean, some of the projects that we're doing here, they're pilot projects. It's the first time that they're being done in Gaza. So we're trying to help by proving the added value of some of these new business models or these new innovations through these pilot projects, and trying to support the authorities in taking on these new areas. So, for example, net metering is fairly new to Gaza, and so this is now something that there's starting to be agreements with the relevant authorities that there can be these net metering agreements to feed solar into the network.
Thank you so much, Emma. And actually, I do have a follow-up question for you, so maybe you can stay on the line. So the question to you is, how do you develop a community-based microgrid with the business models?
Yeah, so we've looked at a few different setups that would include the different revenue streams that would for the business models. So as I was showing you kind of those mapping out images before, there's ways with the operation and maintenance contract to create revenue streams, whether that's going to be taken on by the utility or by the community, or perhaps by a third-party private sector. This is still what we're developing the ideas behind. And then the new revenue streams could also come from the sources of electricity that we're adding to the network. So it's not just the utility now, but the solar, the battery, the generator. So all of this builds in, and so the tariffs that would be set would obviously cover the costs of all of this, and build into to consider replacement costs and all these things, so that it's a sustainable, financially sustainable model that can hopefully last for the 30-year lifetime of the project.
Thank you so much. Then Kyle, I have a couple of questions to you. So the first question is, how has COVID impacted the profitability and rate of return for the installed mini-grid project, especially in urban settings like Goma? So if you could quickly talk about that.
Yeah, so Goma, as I said earlier, sits on the border with Rwanda, and Congo imports, and people in Goma in particular, import a lot of food from Rwanda, Uganda. And so, and then also just tons of trade flows through that border. And so when that border shut with COVID, yeah, it definitely slowed things down. The government also, I guess, prohibited airline travel and slowed other kinds of traffic, except for lorries to kind of move goods throughout Congo. So it definitely slowed down our ramp up, more than we would like, but things have continued to pick up as those restrictions have receded and been eased. And so that's been exciting to see things continue to grow, and more people to sign up and subscribe for our services. But it's definitely had an impact in terms of slowing things down for us.
Thank you so much. Maybe then I have one last question to you before we end the Q&A session. Is how was Nuru able to make the projects bankable by signing on only 40% of the businesses in Goma?
Can you repeat that question again?
Yes, sure. So how was Nuru able to make the project bankable by signing on only 40% of businesses?
So basically, for us, the way we work is signing power purchase agreements with commercial off-takers or large organizations who are able to commit to consuming a large amount of energy. And the way we try to typically think about that is if we can get at least 40% of our energy being sold to these larger commercial industrial off-takers and large organizations, and there's a dense enough population where there's underserved or unmet demand, then that enables us to then sell the remaining 60% of electricity to residential households. And investors see these power purchase agreements and these commitments to purchase up to 40% of electricity as a bankable, investable, investor-friendly opportunity.
Thank you so much. We do have a lot of questions coming in, but since we are coming towards the end of the webinar, so thank you to all our speakers for your amazing presentations. I'm pretty sure all of our audience enjoyed it. And before I let our audience go, I want to quickly shout out that this webinar is under the framework of Global Plan of Action. So a Global Plan of Action also has a LinkedIn group. So if you're interested, please head to the LinkedIn group, and there you can discuss further on these topics that we discussed during the webinar, or touch upon any topic that we failed to discuss during the webinar, and so on. Also, as I mentioned before the start of the webinar, we will upload all the webinar documentations, and you will get a follow-up email where you have a link to download all of this documentation, the webinar recording and the presentations. So, and also once you close the webinar, a survey will pop up. Please use the survey and let us know what you think of the webinar. There you also have the options to suggest new topics for next webinar. This is really helpful for us because that helps us to design the upcoming webinars. So thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to all our attendees, and I wish you a good day. Thank you and bye-bye.